The United States Army hunted him longer than it hunted almost any other man in the history of the American West. Not because he commanded an empire, not because he had an army, but because he refused to kneel. And when a nation with unlimited resources cannot force one man to surrender on its own terms, that man becomes something far more dangerous than an enemy. He becomes a symbol of resistance that refuses to die. Geronimo was not born a warrior by choice. He was born into the Chiricahua Apache world, a world shaped by movement, survival, and an unbreakable connection to the land. To his people, the desert was not empty, it was alive. Every canyon, every ridge, every water source carried memory and meaning. Geronimo grew up learning how to listen to the land, how to move through it without leaving signs, how to survive where outsiders collapsed within days. These skills were not taught as combat tactics, were taught as life. That life was destroyed violently and without warning. When Mexican soldiers attacked his camp, killing his wife, his children, and his mother, something inside Geronimo hardened permanently. This was not a loss he could mourn and move on from. It was a fracture that reshaped his purpose. From that moment forward, Geronimo did not fight for territory or political leverage. He fought because surrender meant extinction, and peace meant living under the authority of people who had already shown they would take everything without consequence. As American expansion surged westward, Geronimo found himself trapped between two forces that saw him as a problem to be eliminated. Mexican forces hunted him relentlessly. American forces labeled him hostile and dangerous. Treaties were offered and broken. Reservations were promised and turned into prisons. Geronimo learned quickly that agreements with expanding governments were temporary tools, not permanent commitments. Each surrender led to worse conditions. Each promise dissolved under pressure from settlers and politicians. What made Geronimo uniquely dangerous was not numbers. He rarely commanded more than a small group of followers. What made him dangerous was understanding. He understood terrain in a way no military map could capture. He understood patience. He understood fear. And most importantly, he understood that survival depended on never fighting on the enemy's terms. When pursued, he disappeared. When cornered, he slipped through gaps no one believed existed. When surrounded, he waited until pressure created mistakes. The U.S. Army responded with overwhelming force. Thousands of soldiers were deployed to capture a handful of Apache fighters. Entire regions were swept repeatedly. Resources were drained. Morale suffered. Officers rotated in and out, each convinced they would be the one to finally end the chase. And each time Geronimo escaped, reinforcing a humiliating truth. The most powerful army in the hemisphere could not impose its will on a man who refused to play by its rules. To American settlers, Geronimo became a terrifying figure. To military leaders, an obsession. To his people, a protector who refused to trade freedom for survival inside a cage. To the government, an embarrassment that demanded resolution. But to Geronimo himself, this was never about legend. It was about remaining Apache in a world designed to erase him. Every pursuit tightened the noose, but it also exposed the limits of force. The harder the army pushed, the more Geronimo proved that dominance does not guarantee control. He was not trying to win a war. He was trying to outlast one. And in that strategy, he succeeded far longer than anyone thought possible. This was the beginning of the longest manhunt in the history of the American West. And it would not end the way the United States expected. As the pursuit of Geronimo intensified, the American Southwest transformed into a battlefield without front lines. This was not a conventional war. There were no flags to capture, no cities to siege, no decisive engagements that could be written cleanly into reports. Instead, there was exhaustion. Endless marches through brutal heat, horses collapsing from thirst, soldiers scanning ridgelines that never revealed what they were looking for. Geronimo understood that the desert itself was his greatest ally, and he used it with a mastery that no uniformed force could match. The U.S. Army committed staggering resources to the hunt. Entire regiments were deployed to chase fewer than 50 Apache men, women, and children. Scouts were hired. Telegraph lines buzzed with updates. Forts coordinated movements across hundreds of miles. And still Geronimo slipped away again and again. Each escape deepened the frustration and embarrassment of commanders who could not explain how so many men could fail to capture so few. Geronimo's strategy was deceptively simple. He never stayed where he was expected to be. He traveled at night. He split into small groups and rejoined later. He avoided predictable water sources and moved through terrain others considered impassable. He understood that the army relied on supply lines, schedules, and communication. He relied on memory, instinct, and silence. Where the army needed certainty, Geronimo thrived in uncertainty. This asymmetry broke morale. Soldiers began to fear the land more than the enemy. Every canyon became a potential ambush. Every shadow suggested pursuit. Officers rotated frequently, each bringing new plans that failed against an opponent who did not need plans at all. The longer the chase dragged on, the clearer it became that the problem was not tactics. It was mindset. The army wanted closure. Geronimo wanted endurance. If this story is pulling you in, take a moment now. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below whether you believe true strength comes from overwhelming force or from knowing when to refuse the fight entirely. The psychological impact extended far beyond the battlefield. Newspapers sensationalized Geronimo, turning him into a near-mythic figure. Settlers demanded protection. Politicians demanded results. The army demanded an end to the embarrassment. Geronimo's name became shorthand for failure at the highest levels of command. And the more pressure mounted, the more relentless the pursuit became. Yet even as pressure increased, Geronimo remained skeptical of every offer of peace. He had surrendered before. He had been betrayed before. Reservations were not sanctuaries. They were holding pens where disease, hunger, and despair did the work that bullets could not. Each time he returned to confinement, conditions worsened. Each time he escaped, he did so with the knowledge that capture meant slow death for his people. The chase crossed borders, dragging Mexican and American forces into uneasy cooperation. Even then, Geronimo exploited the seams between authorities, moving where jurisdiction blurred and responsibility dissolved. The very structure of modern governance worked against itself in the face of a man who belonged to no system he recognized as legitimate. As years passed, the toll mounted on everyone involved. Soldiers aged, budgets swelled, public patience thinned. And through it all, Geronimo continued to move, to evade, to survive, not because he believed he could defeat the United States outright, but because he believed that surrender on their terms would erase everything that made survival meaningful. Endurance has limits. Supplies grew scarce. Followers weakened. Constant flight eroded even the strongest resolve. Geronimo faced an impossible calculus: continue running and watch his people starve, or surrender once more to an enemy he did not trust, hoping that visibility might offer protection where promises never had. The chase was nearing its end, not because the army finally won, but because reality closed in from all sides. And the final decision Geronimo would define not just his fate, but how history would remember resistance itself. As the years of constant pursuit dragged on, the reality Geronimo had always understood but refused to accept began to assert itself with brutal clarity. Endurance alone could not protect everyone forever. The desert that had once shielded him now demanded payment. Food became scarce. Ammunition dwindled. The small group that followed him carried exhaustion in their bodies and fear in their eyes. Children grew weaker. Elders struggled to keep pace. Freedom, once a shield, began to feel like a slow tightening trap. Geronimo was not blind to this suffering. Contrary to the image painted by his enemies, he was not indifferent to pain. He felt every loss personally. Every night spent hiding in the mountains was weighed against the faces of those who depended on him. He had always accepted risk for himself. Accepting it for others was different. Leadership, in its cruelest form, forces decisions where every option carries loss. The United States Army, sensing this shift, intensified psychological pressure. Rather than relying solely on brute force, they turned to negotiation, manipulation, and exhaustion. Promises were renewed. Assurances were whispered. Officers claimed that this time would be different, that families would be protected, that exile would end, that survival inside the system was possible. Geronimo listened, but he did not believe. He had learned that words spoken under pursuit rarely survived peace, yet the calculus was changing. Continued flight meant inevitable death for the weakest among his people. Surrender meant captivity, but captivity meant life, at least in the short term. Geronimo's resistance had always been about survival with dignity. Now survival itself was under threat. The line he had sworn never to cross stood directly in front of him. The final pursuit unfolded not as a dramatic battle, but as a quiet collapse. Scouts closed in. Escape routes narrowed. Water sources were monitored. The vastness of the Southwest shrank into a cage defined by hunger and fatigue. Geronimo understood that the chase had reached its natural end, not because the army had become smarter, but because time had done what armies could not. In 1886, after years of defiance, Geronimo surrendered to General Nelson Miles. It was not a moment of defeat in the traditional sense. There was no admission of wrongdoing, no apology, only an acknowledgement of limits. Geronimo surrendered not because he believed the United States had won, but because continued resistance would kill those he was trying to protect. The aftermath was immediate and unforgiving. Despite promises, Geronimo and his people were treated as prisoners of war. They were transported far from their homeland, scattered across unfamiliar environments, designed to sever their connection to the land that defined them. Children were taken to schools meant to erase language and memory. The very fate Geronimo had fought to avoid began unfolding anyway. For the United States, the surrender was declared a victory. Headlines announced the end of the Apache threat. Politicians celebrated closure. The army reclaimed its pride. But beneath that narrative lay an uncomfortable truth. It had taken thousands of soldiers, years of pursuit, and the slow starvation of a people to capture one man and his followers. And even then, what had been captured was a body, not a belief. Geronimo's imprisonment transformed him into something even the army could not fully control. He became a living reminder of resistance that could not be erased. He was paraded at events, photographed, displayed as proof of American dominance. Yet every appearance carried a silent contradiction. The empire needed to show him precisely because it had failed to break him in the wild. Freedom had been taken from Geronimo's body, but his defiance had already escaped into history, and that defiance would not stay contained for long. Because captivity does not end a story, is how it is told. When Geronimo entered captivity, the United States believed the story was finished. The last great holdout of the Southwest had surrendered. The longest pursuit in frontier history was officially over. Reports were filed, medals were earned, and a chapter of resistance was declared closed. But history has a way of revealing truths that victory speeches cannot hide, because while Geronimo's body was confined, the meaning of his resistance only grew stronger. Geronimo was held as a prisoner of war for the rest of his life. Not because he continued to fight, but because the government never trusted that his influence could be neutralized. He was moved far from his homeland, placed among people and landscapes that stripped away familiarity and comfort. This was not punishment for crimes. It was containment of an idea, the idea that one man, refusing to accept erasure, had forced an empire to chase him across deserts, mountains, and borders for decades. Ironically, captivity turned Geronimo into something the United States could not control. A living symbol, he appeared at public events, fairs, and exhibitions. He was photographed, interviewed, and displayed as proof that the frontier wars were over. But every image carried an uncomfortable contradiction. If America had truly won, why did it need to keep showing the man it claimed was defeated? Why did his presence still command attention, fear, and fascination? Geronimo understood this dynamic with painful clarity. He had lost his freedom, his land, and much of his people's future. But he had not lost his identity. He spoke openly about broken promises. He told his story in his own words when he could. He refused to pretend that surrender meant agreement. Even confined, even aging, he remained Apache in a system designed to erase that identity completely. The years passed, and the American West continued to transform. Railroads expanded, towns grew. The violence that once defined the frontier faded into memory. And yet, Geronimo's story did not fade with it. It lingered precisely because it exposed something the dominant narrative tried to bury. That expansion was not inevitable destiny, but a process enforced through relentless pressure, broken treaties, and the calculated destruction of ways of life deemed inconvenient. Geronimo died in 1909, far from the freedom he had fought to preserve. Officially, his death closed the final chapter of Apache resistance. Unofficially, it did the opposite. His life became a mirror held up to American history, reflecting both resilience and cost. He was no longer just a man. He was a question that refused to go away. What does victory mean when it requires the permanent imprisonment of a symbol? What does progress cost when it demands the disappearance of entire cultures? And who truly wins when survival itself becomes an act of defiance? Geronimo did not defeat the United States militarily. He never claimed to. What he did was far more unsettling. He proved that overwhelming power does not guarantee moral victory. He proved that resistance, even when crushed, leaves a legacy that cannot be fully controlled. He proved that some fights are not about winning land, but about refusing to vanish quietly. If this story made you see the American West through a different lens, take a moment now. Leave a like to support honest history told without simplification. Subscribe to the channel for long-form stories that confront myth with reality. And comment below, do you believe Geronimo lost his fight? Or did he force history to remember what it tried to forget? In the end, Geronimo was not remembered as a man who surrendered. He was remembered as a man who made an empire chase him and never truly catch what he stood for.